In January 2007, Steve Jobs introduced the very first iPhone, the product which has been rumored for years, but nobody knew any details about it. It was the biggest secret, and even some of Apple's highest executives had no idea how the iPhone would look like. And it was definitely a revolution. iPhone had no keyboard, but instead of it, there was this giant screen. And believe me, in 2007, it really was giant. It featured 3.5-inch LCD display with the multi-touch technology. It was the first smartphone to rely on this capacitive multi-touch display. There were touchscreens before the iPhone, but they used the resistive screens and usually came with a stylus. The original iPhone had the aluminum on the back, with the exception of a little area at the bottom, which was plastic. This helped with the cellular and Wi-Fi reception. From today's point of view, the specs of the first iPhone are almost laughable. Like I said, it featured a 3.5-inch screen with the resolution of 320 by 480, 2-megapixel rear camera with no flash, and it was powered by a 400 MHz ARM CPU made by Samsung and 128 MB of RAM. The first iPhone came in 4, 8 and 16 GB storage option. Probably the biggest thing about the iPhone was its revolutionary user interface, because it was so simple and you could navigate it with your fingers only. Apple called the operating system simply iPhoneOS, and they kept the name until the version 4.0 when they changed it to iOS. First iPhone of course shipped with iPhoneOS 1.0, and later you could upgrade it up to iPhoneOS 3.1.3. This model went on sale in June 2007, and it was discontinued a year later in June 2008. Exactly a year after the first iPhone went on sale, Apple introduced its successor, the iPhone 3G. From the front, the 3G looked exactly the same as the original iPhone. There was the same 3.5-inch screen with the same resolution and the same home button. But from the back, the 3G looked nothing like the first one. The back of the phone was now plastic instead of aluminum, and 3G also came in two colors, black and white. The camera also stayed the same at 2 megapixels. Also, the used CPU and the amount of RAM stayed the same as on the first iPhone. The most notable difference was of course the support for faster 3G networks, a feature that the original iPhone did not have. There was also a GPS module in the iPhone 3G, so you could use it to pinpoint your exact location or use the phone as a navigation, for example in the car. Maybe because of the design, Apple used a little bit smaller battery in the 3G compared to the original iPhone. And because 3G networks and GPS were really power-consuming, the battery life on the iPhone 3G was worse compared to the original. Apple got rid of the lowest 4GB option, so the storage capacity of the iPhone 3G was 8 and 16 GB. The iPhone 3G originally came with the iPhoneOS 2.0, but later it could be upgraded up to iOS 4.2. The 3G was discontinued in June 2010. In June 2009, Apple announced third generation of the iPhone and called it the iPhone 3GS. The S in the naming meant speed according to Steve Jobs. The 3GS looked identical to 3G, the white or black plastic on the back and glass on the front covering the same 3.5-inch LCD screen. But inside, the 3GS was a massive improvement over the previous model. For the first time, Apple upgraded the CPU, and the 3GS was powered by a 600 MHz ARM processor made by Samsung. Also, the amount of RAM was doubled, so the 3GS had 256 MB. Apple also improved the camera, and they equipped 3GS with 3-megapixel shooter with the autofocus and macro mode, but the flash or front-facing camera was still missing. But Apple finally added a video shooting feature, so the 3GS could shoot videos at resolution of 640 by 480. Also, the connectivity was improved, as 3GS supported higher speed networks. This model was sold in 8, 16 and for the first time also in 32GB option. iPhone 3GS originally shipped with iPhoneOS 3.0, but you could upgrade it up to iOS 6.1.6. It was discontinued in September 2012. The iPhone 4 was the very anticipated redesign of the iPhone, but it unfortunately got leaked, so by the time Steve Jobs announced it in the June of 2010, Everyone knew how this iPhone is going to look like. But it still was a welcome change, as the iPhone 4 featured an all-new square design with glass on the back and front and stainless steel frame in the middle with these cutouts, which served as a sophisticated antenna system. Almost everything about this model was changed. It still had a 3.5-inch display, but now it was a Retina display, which meant that it was so high resolution at 960 by 640 that human retina can't recognize individual pixels. The camera was also massively improved, as it featured two cameras, the front 5-megapixel one with LED flash and VGA front camera for the new FaceTime feature. iPhone 4 was also the first iPhone that used Apple's custom single-core 1 GHz Apple A4 CPU and 512 MB of RAM, so the performance was much better than on previous generations. The iPhone 4 came in 8, 16 and 32 GB storage options and was sold in black and white colors. It originally shipped with iOS 4.0 and it could be upgraded up to iOS 7.1.2. It was discontinued in September 2013. iPhone 4S was introduced in October 2011, just one day before the death of Steve Jobs. It was the second of the S models, so it came with the same design as the previous generation, but inside almost everything was changed. The screen and the resolution stayed the same, but Apple heavily improved the camera on the 4S. It now featured an 8-megapixel sensor with the ability to shoot 1080p videos at 30 fps. The performance was significantly better on the 4S, as it featured a dual-core Apple A5 CPU and 512 MB of RAM. Battery life was a little bit better on the 4S, as the CPU in it is more power efficient. For the first time, the iPhone 4S was a world phone, which means it supported both GSM and CDMA networks. But one of the most promoted features of the 4S was a software one. It was the support for the Siri, the Apple-made virtual assistant. iPhone 4S came in black and white, an 8, 16, 32 and for the first time 64 GB storage option. It originally shipped with iOS 5.0 and could be upgraded up to iOS 9.3.5. iPhone 4S was discontinued in September 2014. In September 2012, Apple announced the much-anticipated iPhone 5. It was the last model that Steve Jobs was working on. iPhone 5 was the big step for Apple, as it was the first time they increased the size of the screen, so the 5 featured a 4-inch screen, which was the same width as the previous models, but was taller. Also, the overall design of the device has changed a bit, as it now featured an aluminum back with the glass on the top and bottom. iPhone 5 was also the first iPhone to get rid of the 30-pin charging connector, as it introduced the new Lightning port, which has been present on all iPhones since this one. The camera on the 5 was also slightly improved. It was still an 8-megapixel shooter, but the LED flash was improved and the photos in the low light conditions looked better on the 5. It could also shoot 720p videos with its front-facing camera. iPhone 5 was powered by a dual-core 1.3 GHz Apple A6 CPU and 1 GB of RAM. It was sold in black and silver and 16, 32 and 64 GB storage. It was originally shipped with iOS 6.0 and could be upgraded up to iOS 10.3.3. iPhone 5 was discontinued in September 2013. Alongside the cheaper iPhone 5C in September 2013, Apple also introduced the iPhone 5S, their next-generation flagship iPhone. This was the third time they came with an S version, so the design of the 5S stayed similar to the iPhone 5 the year before it, but there were many changes inside, as it is usual with the S models. iPhone 5S featured the same 4-inch Retina display with the same resolution as the iPhone 5. The camera on the 5S was improved. It featured an 8-megapixel one with the bigger sensor than on the previous one, so it could capture more light and make a better and more detailed photos. It also had a better True Tone flash and ability to shoot slow-motion videos at 120 fps. iPhone 5S was also the first iPhone that featured a fingerprint reader integrated into the home button called Touch ID. iPhone 5S was powered by a dual-core 1.3 GHz Apple A7 CPU, the very first 64-bit CPU to be used in a smartphone. The 5S was made in silver, space gray and gold colors, and 16, 32 and 64 GB storage options. The 5S originally shipped with iOS 7.0 and could be upgraded up to iOS 12.4.6, making it the longest supported iPhone in the history. It was discontinued in March 2016. It was rumored for a long time that Apple is planning to announce a cheaper iPhone, and in 2013 this rumor came true as Apple introduced two iPhones in 1 year for the very first time, and one of them was the iPhone 5C. It is not officially known what the C in the name stands for, but it is rumored that it means colors, although there was a joke floating around saying that it means cheap. Well, it actually was not as cheap as it was rumored. The iPhone 5C design was different from the previous iPhones, as it came with a plastic back instead of a glass or aluminum, so it kind of looks similar to the iPhone 3G and 3GS. But it features a 4-inch display, the same as on the iPhone 5. Actually, almost every spec of the 5C is the same as on the iPhone 5. It's got the same screen, same camera, same CPU, same amount of RAM. It was basically just the iPhone 5 in a plastic body. Only difference is the connectivity, as the 5C supports more 4G LTE bands than the iPhone 5. Also, the battery life is a little bit better on the 5C, as the battery is a tiny bit bigger. It was made in blue, green, pink, yellow and white colors, and 8, 16 and 32 GB options. It originally shipped with iOS 7.0 and could be upgraded up to iOS 10.3.3. iPhone 5C was discontinued in September 2015. In September 2014, Apple also introduced two new iPhones, but this time both of them were flagship models. They introduced the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus. These iPhones were significantly different from the previous models. Apple increased the screen size, so the iPhone 6 featured a 4.7-inch screen and the 6 Plus had even bigger 5.5-inch LCD display. The overall design of these phones was also very different from the previous models, as it was not squared but rounded with the aluminum on the back and the Gorilla Glass on the front. It also featured the same Touch ID fingerprint scanner integrated into the home button. Camera was slightly improved in the iPhone 6. It featured an 8-megapixel shooter similar to the 5S, but with a bigger sensor and better focus abilities. The iPhone 6 Plus also had an exclusive optical stabilization feature. iPhone 6 and 6 Plus were the first iPhones to sport a new NFC feature, which could be used only with the newly introduced Apple Pay service. The both 6 and 6 Plus were powered by a 64-bit 1.4 GHz dual-core A8 CPU, which was just slightly faster than the A7 in the 5S. It also had 1 GB of RAM, the same as the 5S. iPhone 6 and 6 Plus were made in silver, space gray and gold color options, and 16, 32, 64 and 128 GB storage options. These models originally shipped with iOS 8.0 and could be upgraded up to iOS 12.4.6. iPhone 6 Plus was discontinued in September 2016, and the iPhone 6 was discontinued in September 2018. In September 2015, Apple introduced the iPhone 6s and 6s Plus. These were traditional S models, so they got the same design as the generation before it, but inside almost everything was new. It was still made in two different display sizes, 4.7 and 5.5 inch. So the size of the screen stayed the same, but Apple added a big feature to it, and that was 3D touch. This means that the display reacts to the pressure you apply on it, and if you apply enough pressure, the iPhone shows you hidden context menu, for example. The Touch ID fingerprint scanner was also improved, as the 6S featured the second-generation scanner, which used more advanced capacitive technology and was also a lot faster. Camera was also better. The 6S got a rear 12-megapixel iSight camera with the ability to shoot up to 4K video at 30 FPS. It could also take new live photos, but the optical image stabilization was still present only on the Plus model. The front camera was 5 megapixels with the ability to shoot 720p video. iPhone 6s was a powerhouse as it was powered by a dual-core 1.8 GHz Apple A9 CPU and 2 GB of RAM. Apple called it the desktop-class CPU. iPhone 6s and 6s Plus were made in silver, space gray, gold and rose gold colors, and in 16, 32, 64 and 128 GB of internal storage. It originally shipped with iOS 9.0 and it's still supported today by the latest iOS 13.4.5. iPhone 6s and 6s Plus were discontinued in September 2018. In the spring of 2016, Apple introduced another cheaper iPhone following the not-so-cheap and not-so-popular iPhone 5C. They call it the iPhone SE, and the SE stands for Special Edition. The phone was design-wise the same as the iPhone 5S, the aluminum and glass on the back and 4-inch screen on the front. But inside it got specs of the iPhone 6s, so it featured the A9 CPU and 2 GB of RAM. It also got the very same rear 12-megapixel camera with the ability to shoot 4K videos at 30 FPS. But front-facing camera was still the 1.2-megapixel one from the iPhone 5s. It also used the first-generation Touch ID sensor instead of the second-generation one from the 6s. So the iPhone SE was basically the iPhone 6s in the body of an iPhone 5s. Only other differences was the front-facing camera and older Touch ID sensor. iPhone SE was made in space gray, silver, gold and rose gold colors, and in 16, 32, 64 and 128 GB storage option. It originally shipped with iOS 9.3, and it still can be upgraded to the latest iOS 13.4.5. iPhone SE was discontinued in September 2018. In the September 2016, Apple announced new generation of their flagship iPhones, and it was the iPhone 7 and iPhone 7 Plus. Like the last two generations, these were also made in two sizes, 4.7-inch and 5.5-inch. From the front, they looked identical to the 6s and 6s Plus, but there were some tweaks to the backside. The camera modules were bigger, and also the plastic cutouts for the antenna system were moved to the far top and far bottom, so the overall design looked cleaner. On the front side there was still home button with the integrated Touch ID sensor, but the button was not mechanical, but it was just a sensor which gave you a haptic feedback when you applied pressure on it. And for the first time, iPhone 7 was water resistant with IP67 certification. This was also the first iPhone which removed the 3.5mm headphone jack. The camera was one of the standout features of these iPhones, as the smaller model featured improved 12-megapixel sensor with the optical image stabilization and ability to shoot 4K videos at 30 FPS. The iPhone 7 Plus featured additional rear sensor, making it the first dual-camera iPhone. The second sensor was a telephoto one used for the new portrait mode. Both of these models had 7-megapixel front-facing camera, which could shoot 1080p video. The iPhone 7 and 7 Plus were powered by a quad-core 2.3 GHz Apple A10 Fusion CPU. The iPhone 7 featured 2 GB of RAM, while the 7 Plus got 3 GB. These models were sold in matte black, jet black, silver, gold, rose gold, and product red colors, and in 32, 128, and 256 GB storage option. They originally shipped with iOS 10.0 and can be upgraded up to the latest iOS 13.4.5. iPhone 7 and 7 Plus were discontinued in September 2019. In September 2017, Apple announced 3 new iPhones, and first 2 of them were successors to the previous iPhones, the iPhone 8 and iPhone 8 Plus. These were essentially just upgraded 7 and 7 Plus, as they featured very similar design with 4.7-inch and 5.5-inch screens. Only really noticeable difference was that the 8 and 8 Plus had the glass back, which made it possible for Apple to add the wireless charging feature. The screen's haptic home button sensor and Touch ID scanner stayed the same as on the iPhone 7. The camera was slightly improved as it featured rear 12-megapixel iSight camera with a new 6-element lens and wider color capture. The 8 Plus also featured an additional telephoto lens. The iPhone 8 and 8 Plus were powered by a 64-bit 6-core A11 Bionic CPU. There were 2 high-performance cores and 4 high-efficiency cores. The iPhone 8 had 2 GB of RAM, while the 8 Plus had 3 GB of RAM. These models were sold in space gray, silver, gold, and product red colors, and in 64 and 256GB storage options. They originally shipped with iOS 11.0 and can be still upgraded to the latest iOS 13.4.5. As of April 5, 2020, iPhone 8 and 8 Plus are still being sold new by Apple. Alongside the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, Apple also introduced a completely new redesigned model in September 2017. They called it iPhone 10, and 10 meant 10 years from the introduction of the very first iPhone. Apple described this model as a future of the smartphone, and it truly was a much-needed change in the iPhone lineup. Almost everything was improved with the iPhone 10. It featured a glass on the front and back, and a stainless steel in the middle. The front side of the iPhone was also very different, as Apple got rid of the home button and made the display go from the edge to edge and top to bottom, with the exception of a little notch in the top middle part, which covered the front-facing camera and the new sensors for Face ID facial recognition feature that replaced Touch ID. The screen on the 10 was 5.8-inch, and it was the OLED panel for the very first time. Also, the camera was a little bit improved. Aside from being vertical instead of horizontal, the quality of the pictures was also improved, as it featured optical image stabilization on both lenses for sharper images, and it could also shoot 4K video at 60 FPS. The main difference on the iPhone 10 was the UI that had to be tweaked because of missing home button. This iPhone was the first one to introduce gestures as main form of navigating around the OS. Like the iPhone 8, the 10 was also powered by a 6-core 2.4 GHz A11 Bionic CPU with 3 GB of RAM and came in 64 and 256GB storage options. It was made in space gray and silver colors. iPhone 10 originally shipped with iOS 11.1, and it can be upgraded to the latest iOS 13.4.5. It was discontinued in September 2018. In September 2018, Apple introduced a successor to the iPhone 10, and that was the iPhone XS. They also introduced a bigger version, the iPhone XS Max. These two models came in 5.8 and 6.5-inch screen sizes and were just an incremental update to the iPhone 10. Design stayed the same, but Apple claimed that the XS does have a tiny bit better screen because of HDR10 support and better touch sensitivity. The camera was also slightly improved, but that was for the most part because of better AI, which took care of post-processing. But the sensor on the XS does have a bigger pixels, so it can take more light in and make better photos in low light conditions. iPhone XS is also better at being water and dust resistant, because it came with an IP68 certification instead of IP67 on the 10. iPhone XS and XS Max were powered by a 6-core 64-bit A12 Bionic chip, and they both have 4 GB of RAM. They came in silver, space gray, and gold colors, and 64, 256, and 512GB storage option. iPhone XS and XS Max originally shipped with iOS 12.0 and can be upgraded up to the latest iOS 13.4.5. They were discontinued in September 2019. Alongside the iPhone XS and XS Max, Apple also introduced the iPhone XR. It is still not known what the R stands for, but the XR was meant to be a model that offered the most essential features of the new iPhones, but at a better price. So at first sight, XR looks similar to the 10 or XS, but there are some differences. First is the size. XR is right between XS and XS Max at 6.1 inch. The actual screen is still bezel-less, but the bezels are a little bit bigger than on the 10 or XS. The screen uses an LCD technology instead of a more advanced OLED, and the XR also lacks the 3D touch feature and replaces it with the haptic touch. The phone now reacts to the longer taps instead of applied pressure. The XR uses the same Face ID identification as the pricier models. There is also only one camera on the iPhone XR, as the telephoto lens is missing, but you can still take portrait photos with the XR because software does all the job here. One of the biggest advantages of XR is better battery life, because lower resolution LCD display is not too power consuming. XR was powered by the same 2.5 GHz A12 Bionic chip, but it had 3 GB of RAM instead of 4 in the XS. It came in black, red, yellow, blue, coral and white and was made in 64 and 128 GB storage variants. iPhone XR originally shipped with iOS 12.0, but it can be upgraded up to the latest iOS 13.4.5. As of April 2020, it is still being sold new by Apple. In September 2019, Apple announced new generation of flagship iPhones, and that was iPhone 11 Pro and 11 Pro Max. These two were successors to the iPhone XS and XS Max. They still came in two sizes, 5.8-inch and 6.5-inch. From the front side, they look the same as the previous generation. In a display notch, there's a still Face ID sensor, which is 30% faster on the 11 Pro. The main difference is on the back of the device. It is now made from a frosted matte glass, and Apple removed all text from it and moved the Apple logo to the center. There are also 3 camera sensors integrated into this square bump, which is made from a shiny glass. There are still wide and telephoto lenses, and the new third lens is ultra-wide. Both wide and ultra-wide can shoot videos at 4K at 60 FPS. The new camera also supports night mode, so night pictures are much more detailed, brightened and sharp. Front-facing camera was also improved, as it is 12 megapixels and can shoot 4K at 60 FPS and also supports slow-motion video. Battery life is also better, because there are bigger batteries, and Apple claims that the 11 Pro can last up to 4 hours of usage more, and 11 Pro Max can last 5 hours more than the XS. Both 11 Pro and 11 Pro Max are powered by a 6-core 2.6 GHz Apple A13 Bionic chip, and they have 4 GB of RAM. They came in space gray, silver, gold and midnight green colors, and 64, 256 and 512 GB storage variants. They originally shipped with iOS 13.0 and can be upgraded up to the latest iOS 13.4.5. As of April 2020, these models are still the most recent Apple flagships, and they are still sold new by Apple. In September 2019, alongside the new flagship models, Apple also introduced the successor to the iPhone XR, and they called it simply iPhone 11, although this is in fact not a direct successor to the iPhone X, but it is essentially just an upgraded iPhone XR. It features similar design to the XR, as it has the same 6.1-inch LCD panel. It also uses the Face ID, which is the same faster one as on the iPhone 11 Pro. On the back, there are some changes compared to the XR. Like the iPhone 11 Pro, this one also removed all the text and just kept the Apple logo in the center. But the glass is not matte but glossy on the iPhone 11. There are 2 rear cameras on the iPhone 11. One is the standard wide sensor, and the second one is ultra-wide. The 11 is missing the telephoto lens, but like on the iPhone XR, you can shoot portrait photos as the software supplements the missing lens. There is also night mode in the iPhone 11 camera. The front-facing camera is also the same 12 megapixel one as on the iPhone 11 Pro. Battery life was a little improved over the XR, as the 11 can last up to 1 hour longer. iPhone 11 has the same hardware as the 11 Pro, so it is powered by a 6-core 2.6 GHz Apple A13 Bionic chip and 4 GB of RAM. It comes in black, green, yellow, purple, red and white, and 64, 128 and 256 GB of storage. It originally shipped with iOS 13.0, but can be upgraded to the latest iOS 13.4.5. As of April 2020, iPhone 11 is still being sold new by Apple.